Namaskaram to all of you. All of you are people I really like and admire. I have Vijay Shiva, who is a celebrated musician, Jayachandran Surendran, who is such a scholar in Sanskrit and everything related to the arts and wisdom. Then there is Kombai Anwar, who is an independent researcher into history, and there is Dr. Allen, who is himself a big scholar in Gandhism. There is Dr. Atanu Datta from VIT. Then there is Rajit Nair, who is a travel person, who is a travel resource, but he is also into Madras Literary Society and a very, very active member of restoring old texts and things like that. Very happy that you are here, Rajit. Naina Shah, who is from Sarvodaya International. She is the secretary coordinator for Tamil Nadu, and she's been working with Alan Nazareth and others on Gandhism. Thank you for being here, Naina. Vaishnavi Ganesh, Chinmaya, Tejas Chinmaya is from Spitmake, and Priya from PSBB, who has seen me do a presentation in her school. Very, very nice that all of you are here. Mahatma Gandhi is such a vast subject that you can never exhaust. You can never ever exhaust anything about him. And here was a man who was looking at truth, and he was looking at all the tenets that we were talking about. Only four we have explored in the videos, but there are many, many, many more. An extraordinary individual who I feel is so misunderstood and is such a layered personality that you can constantly, you can be on both sides. You can criticize him to your heart's content, and you can also look at how extraordinarily he has dealt with it. For why does that happen? Why is he the most revered and the most reviled person in India? It's because he himself opened it up. He himself opened up criticism. He himself asked himself questions. So right from South Africa time, when he began writing in Indian opinion, everything he wrote was in question and answer. Everything he wrote. He himself, as an editor of the newspaper, he asks himself questions and answers them. It's an extraordinary way of doing it because you're already asking yourself questions. Instead of just defending yourself, you're also putting yourself into the mill of criticism. This continues throughout. And, I was just reading his South African years as a lawyer. It's so amazing because he was earning a hell of a lot of money as a lawyer. He was an extremely successful lawyer because he was representing a lot of Indian traders in South Africa, and they needed applications, they needed briefs to be written, etc., etc. And because this gentleman knew English very well, he was able to represent a whole range of traders or Indian traders in South Africa. And he makes a lot of money. Then one day, Balasundaram comes into his office, a young Tamil boy who is an indentured labor. He comes into his office with his mouth bleeding and teeth broken and nose broken. And he tells him that as an indentured boy, he asked his owner for some money. And because he was owned, he was a slave. He was an indentured labor, and the owner had beaten him so badly on his face that his teeth were broken. Now, that incident and the other one, they always, everybody says the being pushed out of the train was a turning point in his life. That was when he just reached South Africa, but that was really not the turning point in life because after that he became a successful lawyer. It was the Balasundaram incidents. Balasundaram comes into his office and he doesn't know Tamil. So somebody in his office translates what Balasundaram was telling him, and that the owner had beaten him black and blue. And Gandhi says, first, I'd like to deal with this in the legal way. But before going to court, before suing this man, I'd like to go talk to him. So he goes and visits the owner of Balasundaram. The very first assignment that Gandhi gets as a young lawyer from India, he goes into arbitration. It's the case of Abdullah and Sons. He goes into arbitration. He says, there is no point. You both are related to each other. You are having some financial issues in the trade. And there is no point because we lawyers will keep on asking for adjudication, and we will keep on pushing the case further. There's no point. You both are related to each other. Why don't you just sit across the table and solve it? He sees to it that he goes and meets the opponent, and a lawyer representing this man goes and meets the opponent and convinces them to talk, and he convinces his own Abdullah to agree to take that money in small installments. He says, your opponent is not capable of paying you that amount at this time, so please allow him to give it to you in small small installments. These kind of things, how does a young man who has just joined a legal profession think of all this? It's so amazing that he achieves it in his very first case. Every incident that he shows his personality, which is why I constantly tell stories of Gandhi, not philosophy, because people can talk about his philosophy quite a lot, but I want incidences because it is the way he lived and reacted in everyday situations that speaks for the man. It is not what he writes, because Gandhi can be quoted against himself constantly, because Gandhi said, I may have said something, I may have written something, but that may not be my latest opinion, because I am willing to change. I am willing to learn more. I'm willing to get more information. And if that more information changes my belief about a certain issue, I'm willing to change. He constantly says that. So people who take up some statement he made in 1918 or 15 or 24 and hold it against him now, I think they are just not looking at the truth. He says, look at truth in every angle possible. Examine it. That is why my constant advice to young people today is, if you get a WhatsApp forward or something, just think twice before you forward it. Think, will this harm another person? Will this give some solace to somebody who is much weaker than me? Will this thing help someone or harm someone? Is this true? Where has this come from? This is the only thing you have to look at when you are looking at information that is being poured in from all kinds of sources into you today. So you have to hold it against truth. You have to look whether this needs my attention or not, whether I should be the chain, the link in the chain to forward it to somebody else. Am I endangering another person's interest or enhancing or helping another person? If you can only think this and look at, and then what is this issue that has come to me? How much importance is this in my life or in the cosmic scheme of things? How important is this for me to be a part of that chain to forward this to someone else? Because once it is electronically moved, it becomes a monster. It can become a monster. It can go everywhere. It can It can become a monster. So many people are suffering today because of that, because of this kind of issues that are being forwarded by a lot of people. So always, please, now today it is much, much more important about Satya of Gandhi in trying to see what information you're getting, what news you're getting, is it true or not? What is the source of this information? What is the interest of the person who has sent this to me? And what interest do I have in accepting it and forwarding it? Okay, if you can do that, it will be fine. So I was telling you about the turning point of Gandhi. I want to tell you that story. So he becomes a very successful lawyer, and after the Balasundaram incidents, he decides he doesn't want to be a lawyer getting fee from the Indian people anymore. He decides, after reading Unto the Last by John Ruskin, he says that a lawyer or a doctor or a cobbler or a tiller of the soil have the same right to earn their livelihood from the skills they have. They have the same right. Nobody can say a lawyer is anybody better than a tiller of the soil or a repairer of the shoes. Everybody has the same right to live on their life, on their skill. However much the fee differences may be, but the right to live on that skill that you have is the same. So he decided that he will not be a fee charging lawyer anymore, and he decides to become a celibate, and he tells his wife that they are going to live now in a community. So he purchases this little land for a farm called Phoenix Farm. He buys that, and he says, "We will live. All of us will live on the skills that we have. We will grow our own food." And that is when he starts printing Indian opinion. So opinions of people. I went there and I saw the old machine in South Africa. I'd gone in Durban. I'd gone to Phoenix Farm. They have of course a duplicate machine. They have remade the machine that printed Indian opinion. So in Indian opinion, he wants to talk about issues that Indians are facing in South Africa. So this the idea of starting a newsletter and getting the opinions of all the Indians around him and to give them a voice and become their voice, because every conversation he's having, he's kind of deliberating on it in the Indian opinion news pages. So he deliberates over an issue and he invites comments and answers questions very patiently. This goes on, and it was a hand cranked machine that he was working on. It was a print, paper that was printed there, etc., etc. The proof. So he decides after Balasundaram incidents to go back home and bring his wife and children to South Africa. So when he is here for 5 months, he travels around India. This is 1896. He travels around India talking about the injustices for Indians in South Africa. He says if we are British citizens, all citizens should be treated the same. Why different treatment for Indians in South Africa is the question, because they can't buy businesses in set up businesses in populated places. Colored people cannot walk on certain streets, and rules kept changing every week. And you needed to carry a pass. You needed to give 10 fingerprints, etc., etc. All these things were there. And so he makes a list of this and he publishes a green pamphlet in India. He first prints 5,000 copies and all are sold out. And then he comes to Madras, and already he is well known because of his Balasundaram case. And students draw the carriage. They release the horse and draw the carriage to take him to G.A. Natation's house. That's a different story. But all this news of his having printed this green pamphlet, having discussed the Indian situation of Indians in South Africa, has reached the whites in South Africa. They are waiting for Gandhi, and they say if he comes, we will take revenge on him. So when he goes into the ship, and the ship, his wife and his son and another nephew, they are there in the ship, and it is quarantined for 23 days, saying it is bringing plague. They don't want the ship to land. They say Indians are coming and taking up our jobs. They are, they are same thing like immigrant issues anywhere. So the whites in South Africa didn't want this ship to get this Indians disembarked. The ship's captain and Gandhi's friend, Mr. Lofton, the ship's captain says, "You please leave with us in the night. We will cover you. Let your wife and children get down during the day." Gandhi says, Lofton also agrees that it's not right to do that. He says, "I'm not a coward. I don't want to." And he says, "I need to explain to these people that I'm not against them. I want equal treatment for us. We are not taking anybody's job." So he disembarks during the day. He's hit, he's kicked, and they throw stones, and he's bleeding from his forehead. And there is a Mrs. Alexander who's going there on the road, and she's the wife of the police superintendent. She sees this and she says, "Oh my God, this is lawyer, leader of Namaskaram, Mr. Mohan. He's a lawyer, he's the leader of Indians, and you are kicking him." So she says, "Please stop." And she takes him to Pasi Rustumji's house. And then the police superintendent, Mr. Alexander, meets another group of people who come there and say, "Give us Gandhi or we'll burn this house down." Mr. Alexander advises Gandhi to change into a police officer's uniform and leave by the back door. Now, the same man takes two opposite decisions for the same problem on the same day. How is it? When he's coming down from the ship, he says, "I can't be a coward." But when he is, it is truth that you don't have to be sticking to something like that. If you want to be part of the violence, you get into it. When you know that you cannot win a situation, you get out of it. You get out of that situation in some way. So he goes away from that place in a police officer's uniform. This incident was a turning point in Gandhi's life. That is when he decides that he has to become the leader of the Indian community. Not leader, he has to work for the Indian community in South Africa and somehow deal with the government and bring it. So he brings in all kinds of creative ways of doing it. Nobody had ever thought of the kind of techniques that he brings in, the kind of, if I go on talking, I'll be talking till tomorrow. The kind of techniques that he brings in, and he refuses to sue the guys who attacked him. He refuses to, when he agrees with General Smuts to give his fingerprints, because General Smuts says, "You agree to give your fingerprints, and I will talk with the British government and get you the concessions you want for Indians." So he agrees, and the Indian people are saying, "We are protesting. How can we agree to give the fingerprints?" So Gandhi says, "Let's do it and see, because we can't just be standing on stupidly standing on our stand." So he says, "I will go and give the fingerprint." So he goes and gives the fingerprint. Some people are very angry. So he is attacked. There is a knife attack on Gandhi, because they say that you asked us not to give fingerprints. Now you are giving fingerprints. He says, "Because I asked you not to give, I should be the first one to go and give, because I want to know if General Smuts will agree for this negotiation that we have done. And he refuses to sue that person, take that person to court, or give a complaint to police for attacking him. He says that it is ignorance. It is that I have not explained properly to these people that has led to this. So he says we have to negotiate, we have to talk, we have to think about why we are doing this and what we are, So this kind of led him into the kind of techniques that he started bringing into the struggle that he was leading. I don't want this to be a monologue. If there are comments or questions, I'd be happy.
Is cleanliness still a luxury? On the same note, the society has many strata of people, and unfortunately, something as important as these are practical only for a few. And that was actually said for Satya. And the question, Satya, would like to debate more about why truth and non-violence are two sides of the same coin, and why does truth change over time? Is truth objective or subjective?
For him, trying to understand another person's point of view is non-violence. That's all. Trying to understand the opponent's point of view is non-violence. That and the muyarchi, just that, just even that thought that you want to understand the thought of the other person, the idea of the other person is non-violence for him. So I've had lot of talks with young people about the situations they face, what are the conflicting situations they face. Most of the conflicts are because you have a certain idea in your mind, and you don't know, the other person has some other idea. You want to convert that person to your idea, and you don't want to see the other person's point of view. And just that trying to understand the other person's point of view, why that person has that point of view itself is non-violence, according to him. Now, why is the Satya and Ahimsa together? Because truth has several sides to it. So, it is always subjective. Truth is always subjective.
Is it subjective or objective? You have to understand in context to colonial reality. When the Britishers ruled us, it was their version of truth that they came as to civilize us. But after Gandhi, after the emergence of post-colonial reality, after 1947, now history is being written that they came as not to civilize us, but to loot us. This is post-colonial version of truth. In the colonial version of truth, it was different. In the post-colonial version of truth, it is different. But if you want to reinterpret it, as ma'am pointed out, it's a brilliant opening. She talked about Satya related to WhatsApp images. This comes more or less in postmodern versions of truth. This is a very explosive topic, where the entire world is flooded with fake news, as ma'am pointed out. But different, we are at this time to really examine it very, very carefully. So finally, it moves to a very subjective position. When we analyze it, we have to be objective. But when we assert it, it becomes subjective. That's
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Allen. For him, depending on an organization or government or administration is anathema. He says there is something called Swadharma. Okay. Parchure Shastri was a very great Sanskrit scholar and a very well-read person who had taken part in salt satyagraha, and he had been in Eravda jail when Gandhi was sent there. Okay, so Parchure Shastri was put in solitary confinement. He was quarantined. So Gandhi asked, "What has happened to Parchure Shastri?" Parchure Shastri has got leprosy, which is why in the jail he has been put in a different cell. Gandhiji goes there and looks at Parchure Shastri and he asks him, "What is troubling you? What do you need in the jail?" He's also a convict. He's also in solitary confinement. Okay. But he asks Parchure Shastri, and Parchure Shastri tells him that he doesn't have any reading material and he is really depressed because of that. He wants to read Yoga Vashishta and he wants another book and he wants some paper and stationery to write. Okay. So Gandhi requests Mahadev Desai, his secretary, who comes to see him, to please organize this for Parchure Shastri. When Gandhi was being honored in Yeravda jail and they were going to give him flowers, he said, "I want Parchure Shastri to give me the flowers." You know, this was a gesture. This was a gesture because this man had been quarantined and he had been put away because he was a leprosy patient. And later invites Parchure Shastri to come to Sevagram and he cleans his wound every day. He cleans his body. Gandhiji cleans Parchure Shastri's body every day. Okay. So in the middle of summer, he is invited to Shimla for a meeting. Okay. So Gandhiji says, since I have one bogi for myself, children can come with me from the ashram. So Narayan Desai, son of Mahadev Desai, writes about how thrilled they were that in this hot summer day from Varda, in the hot summer place, they were going to Shimla for a holiday, for a meeting. I mean, for the children, it was a holiday. So they went 2 days of traveling all the way in a train to Shimla. Once the initial meeting was over, the second meeting that was to have taken place, because the other person had some other work, they said it will be 8 days later. Okay. So Narayan Desai says children were thrilled. They're going to be in Shimla for another 8 days. Gandhi says, "No, pack your bag. We are going back to Varda." Why? People ask, you will have only 3 days in Varda. You will have to come back to Shimla for the meeting. He says, "But Parchure Shastri needs my care. I need to go and tend to him." So he says, "I have to go back." So 3 days he comes to Varda to give physical work, look after him physically, Parchure Shastri, and goes back to Shimla for the meeting. These are the kind of stories that I want to tell people. Here was a man who said, "My life is my message. Don't look at my writing. Don't look at my speeches. Look at the way I lived." So if the people say Dalit issue, he had adopted a Dalit girl and he got her married against all opposition. And his Swadharma, he said, "I have," when they said you can't cross the ocean, you cannot go and study in England, it's against religion. He said, "I'm not harming anybody by my going to England, crossing the ocean. You can excommunicate me if you want from my religion. I'm going." So he goes. That is his Swadharma. Yes, Anwar, you have to say something.
Thanks, Devika. That was interesting. But I do think that that Swadharma and not depending on the government.
Yeah.
That I think I don't know. Looking back, maybe it was an elitist or a naive view, because in a country like India, and especially during the times when Gandhi was, even today it is, we are talking about clean water. That is where the whole thing came. Now you don't have a whole lot of people based on their caste don't have access to water. So where is this thing of Swadharma coming? They can't even go access. There is no access. So I think simply saying that government alone don't depend on the government. I think it has.
It was again. I tell you, Anwar, it was not his solitary view. He didn't say that. He it must have been one of those things that he said. Okay, because managing water was one of his main ideas. He talked about using solar energy in that time. In the 1920s, he talked about using solar energy. He said, water, one day you're going to be buying water. Please remember, he said, one day they'll be selling water if you don't take care of it now. Which is why he kept thinking about village as a unit. you know of course it may be caste ridden, but his idea was that the upper caste will change their mind and use their wisdom and intelligence to change the situation, which is very difficult. But his idea was to change the mindset of the upper caste people, uh, into this issue. But he did bring it into political discourse. He did bring caste into political discourse. He did bring oppression into political discourse. He did bring uh, economy and environment into political discourse. These were things that he felt that people should discuss and work on.
There's no doubt that these values are important, and these are the values that are going to save us, protect us, and will probably lead us further. But really, the question is, how far are we in a position to even personally implement these wonderful values that we would like to? And actually, within the society, how far are we practically implementing it? And is there a hope? That's
Mahatma Gandhi says that the best thing that he has given for India is his education policy. He says that is my best thing, more than any political ideology or anything like that. His education meant uh, learning on the job, learning about an environment. He said the first thing that the students should do is come and clean the whole place and look at the environment, look at how So his Nayi Talim, the new basic education, was on doing. On doing was his idea of the skill. Of course, he was a little utopian in that idea, because everybody wanted English education and he didn't want that. He wanted skills and he didn't send his children to school, and that they went into a major problem with his elder son, because his elder son wanted to go to school and he wanted to educate himself. But Gandhi said, no, I'm giving you the best educations, which is why he started the Phoenix Farm, in which he said you learn by physical labor and languages and a little bit of mathematics. This is what he was giving as education. He was saying children should be political even when in school. He said they should look at injustices, they should articulate them, they should bring about. But all this, of course, is too much of a utopian idea, that there was no patience in the administration, establishment, to bring that revolution about. Much later, Montessori and the APL that came, activity-based learning, ABL, activity-based learning, that kind of combined Montessori system, and Gandhi's idea of Naitali was brought. For him, primary education was most important. For Nehru, higher education was very important, which is why he established IITs and IIMs, and so primary education was kind of neglected in the modern era. Higher education was what was concentrated on. There are different opinions about it, and Gandhi's ideas we can discuss, and the way he lived. Whether it is universally applicable, even he disagrees. He says small units, they have to make decisions about what they are doing, about their education. It is the smallest unit that needs to look at its needs and decide on how they look after their water, their sewage system, their food production, etc., etc. They have to decide, he says, the smallest unit.
It's a dangerous trend now in the society. We are all suffering because of that. As you told about WhatsApp message, so how can you bring Gandhian philosophy to change this downtrend?
Yeah. For Gandhi, it wasn't this kind of system that he was looking at, hatred and jealousy, because for him, they say communism is forcing everybody to be equal. Okay. Gandhi was volunteering to be equal, So he said those who have the wealth are the trustees of that wealth for the society. The rich are rich with permission from the poor. Because the poor are poor, the rich are rich. They would not be rich if there were no poor people. So the poor people have given permission for the rich people to be rich, and they have to understand that, and they have to become trustees of that wealth for the good of the people. This is what his economy was. But he believed in the goodness of people. He believed that there were people who would be thinking about this. That is what he wanted his satyagrahi to be. That is the transformation he wanted to bring about in the people's minds. Was it successful or not is for us to, he died in 1948. He cannot be giving us solutions to today's problems. Today's problems are compounded by various difficult, different kinds of regiments in various countries, and the kind of interlinking that is there, the globalization that has come, capitalism with a capital C. The pandemic has taught us that it is possible to be living without these interconnections. It is possible to be living simpler life. It is possible to be not going out by car. It is possible to be here, So it is kind of teaching us that kind of simple life. The pandemic is teaching us that kind of simple life is my question. Somehow, I think nature is taking revenge on the world in the way the pandemic has come in and destroyed the whole lifestyle of people around the world, So now we have to rethink. We have to rethink about how are we going to manage, this top-heavy capitalism that is there, it is the truth. We have to look at this truth in the and then deal with our own swadharmas. I think each one of us must look at how we are going to deal with it, I guess. Gandhi's idea was that you have to speak, you have to act, you have to make your position known, and you have to be ready to take a bullet. You have to be ready to take a bullet. That courage, if you have, go ahead and do it. That is what he said. You have to be ready to give your life. Okay. That is the main thing. Rajit, you had something to say?
Yeah. Devika, you gave the example of the what, right? About think before you share the message with others. That's Gandhi's sacred mantra, the talisman.
Yes, and that is what he kept telling everybody. When you make a decision, think about the weakest person you know, the most helpless person you know, and think about this decision. How is it going to help him or not? This is what he kept thinking, and that has come to him through his experiences for a long time. Over decades that he was working in, and that was his mantra. That mantra that he said, "I'll give you a talisman," which you have to think about the weakest person, which is not happening today. It's the weakest who are suffering. As I told you earlier, you have to be thinking about the situation. It's your Swadharma to balance out, to analyze the situation and see what is what am I gaining from this? What will the other person gain from this? Is the opponent worthy of my opposition, of my expression? How is it going to help me or the other person? You just look at it, because many of us make compromises in our lives. When we are looking at situations, we think about how much should I fight for in this. Is this going to help me or not? Is my fight going to help me or not? Is this situation, if I fight, will it become worse or will it be okay? Yes, Vijay Shiva. Gandhi never advised us to stop. Okay, he said, "Be ready to take the bullet." Okay, so you have to decide. You have to decide. His wife is the best example for it, Kasturba. So she was a very strong lady. She was very, very independent, but she decided that she is going to be his companion and she will be with him. She wrote letters to her son, who was opposing his father, saying, "Your father is doing so much for the country, for other people. You have to understand him. Don't think he's just your father. Don't expect decisions like any father would give for his son. He is the father for so many people." She writes a long letter, and as Mr. Mohan was talking about it recently, and she says, last two lines are, "Where are you sleeping? What are you eating?" This is what the mother says.
Yes, yes.
But the whole letter is
Yes.
supporting the husband.
Yes,
You know,
That's where,
Yeah.
But the point is that where is the point where I let go? Is there
that I think your inner voice will tell you that. You have to listen to your inner voice. That is what Gandhi always told. Listen to your inner voice, which tells you, if you are looking at it in a unbiased manner, whether you also think about the opponent or the opposition to your idea, not the opponent, maybe the conflict in that situation.
right.
And the conflict layer, what is it that is troubling me? If you analyze it, then the inner voice will tell you where to stop. Who is somebody else to tell you where to stop? It's you who make that decision where to stop, isn't it? None of us is perfect. Gandhi was not perfect. Okay, what we are celebrating about Gandhi is that extraordinary life that he led and the extraordinary courage that he had to take risks and to work towards what he was talking about. And that is what we are celebrating. He was not perfect. He was not 100% perfect man. There were a lot of issues that he dealt with, which we may not agree with today. But we should also look at the context. Everything should be held against in the context that this person was working in. So if we look at that, then we will also not be judgmental about anybody. If we look at the context that they are working in, is it the judgmental attitude that we have that puts us into conflicts, isn't it? We are being very judgmental about so many people, so many things. If we put that in context, then we won't be judgmental.
Ma'am, I think now this pandemic has stopped us from being judgmental. We have realized so many things. Almost all the philosophy what Gandhi had practiced or implemented, everything unknowingly it is getting into place. Bonding, especially the bonding what we have now with the family, with the children, and what we teach, peace, we teach truth, everything. Unknowingly, we realize that it is getting into the minds of the younger generation. It was completely, the younger generation was surrounded with so many things earlier before pandemic, where we couldn't even talk to them about this. But now,
Priya, there is also another point of view that because of the pandemic, there has been a lot of domestic violence. There has been a lot of conflicts within the family. That also is there. There is another issue also
Yes.
that a lot of people are talking about. But, pandemic has taught us how little we can live with. So he was dead against partition. He was completely against partition. He he was so sad that he went and asked Jinnah to become the Prime Minister of India. He said, "Please don't break the nation. If you want to be the Prime Minister, you be the Prime Minister." But Nehru and Sardar Patel, they were not agreeable to it. And British India encouraged Jinnah. British government encouraged this partition idea, and the partition idea had its roots long, long, long before Jinnah came into the politics. Gandhi was totally against it, 100% against it, because he said, even if you bifurcate the land, you will be bifurcating people, you will be bifurcating families. Mountbatten said that there will be no freedom given if there is no partition. Gandhi said, okay, give us freedom, we will bifurcate later. We will talk with Jinnah, and then, you give us power and then we will work on it. Jinnah was not willing. He said, you will not give us the power that we want. So we want a land for ourselves. He wanted to bifurcate. That is the reason why Gandhi goes away to Naukhali. He does not participate in the Freedom Independence Day celebration because he was so sad, he was so hurt with the partition that Congress agreed for it. Congress is not today's Congress. It was the Indian National Congress, which was the father of all other politicians who are put together today. So please don't think of Congress as Congress of today. Okay. So because they agreed for it, he was very sad. He went away to Naukhali, single man. He walked into killing fields, and his presence calmed people, a lot of people. He was wanting to go to the western border later in February, but in January he was killed. So partition idea, wherever I go, people tell me, oh, it was because of Gandhi that partition happened. It's such a contrary to the fact. They think it was his appeasement of Muslims that led to the partition, which is completely outside the factual thing that happened.
Yes, ma'am. Adding on to it, with regard to partition,
yeah,
the country which ruled us for more than 250 years, it did not have the patience and perseverance to ensure a peaceful transfer of power. Nobody is finding fault with the British. This we have to understand it very, very carefully. People find fault with Gandhi for partition.
Yes.
The real people were the British. They were wearing a colonial mask actually. That's a gentleman's mask. So that is the problem now. That is the problem now. More than 10 lakh people had to really lose their homes and work. So the pain was so much, it upset Gandhi so badly that he felt that whatever he stood for was actually a waste. So this complete partition is one thing which has to be addressed very, very carefully, where the British really slipped out of it. That has to reach the people very clearly that a country which ruled us for 250 years was not willing to ensure a peaceful transfer of power when two countries were made. Like that, Israel was formed in 1948 with the help of America and Britain. Okay, exclusively where millions of Palestinians were displaced. It was a future politics. Future politics. Pakistan. I came across a very interesting news one year ago. During this Independence Day celebration in England, in British airport, Indians and Pakistanis were fighting in British airport. Look at the irony. Indian citizens and Pakistanis were fighting in the British airport. This is the irony of life. No. Who were behind the partition is the central idea. That has to be clearly explained. So that, as ma'am said, it's a myth. It's a myth. It's a very valid point. Yeah.
It was also the failure of administration.
Yes.
There should have been collectors who went to all the districts and told about how we can do the partition. What is, counseling should have been done. There should have been that takes hell of a lot of planning. There was no planning whatsoever. They just made a line on the map and said, this is Pakistan and this is India, and it was, the British were leaving us. In two governments were taking the uh, place now. Two little young countries were forming, and nobody knew what was going to happen. That is why the killings began. You know, can you believe it? The army, the Indian army under the British, they lined up, soldiers lined up, and there would be two people sitting on two chairs, this side and that side. He would come up and say, Pakistan or India? India comes this side, Pakistan goes that side. Line up, queue, forms, and he writes down. This guy writes down the name, and that guy writes down the name. So decision had to be made on the spot by these soldiers who had to decide where they were going. It's quite an amazing story that happened beyond the leaders of the freedom struggle, the independence struggle. Okay, let's put that into context of the time. Okay, they were 13 years old when they got married. Okay, she was 2 months older. She was a few months older than Gandhi, and it had been decided that they get married, and it was a child marriage. They both got married, and then he went away to study. But she was always very independent. He writes in the autobiography that he was jealous because she was making her own decisions, where she was going and what she was doing, etc. He tried teaching her, but she said, I'm not interested, etc. Okay. Kasturba was an enormously important person in Gandhi's life. Enormously important. She gave him the power. She gave him the power to be, she was with him through his life. She always was with him. It was not never coerced. There once when untouchable or Dalit came to their house in South Africa, Gandhi writes about how he wanted her to clean the chamber pot, and she said, "I will not touch it." So he tries to throw her out of the house. He says, "How can you not agree to clean a visitor's chamber pot?" So everybody quotes that, saying that he was very cruel to his wife. They don't read the lines that come after that. Okay. He says, she asked him, I am your wife. How can you treat me like this? Where will I go? She asked him. And he felt so ashamed. He felt so ashamed for his action. And then continuously, she gives him the companionship that it's her issue, and she gives him that. And every time she writes to Harilal, she's supporting her husband. She's constantly with him. And this woman who had to deal with so many women in Gandhi's life, Sarojini Naidu and so many others, and is not consulted when he becomes a celibate in South Africa. She's not consulted about it. But still, she stays with him. She continuously supports him. When they go to Champaran, he says, go and teach women hygiene. She says, I don't know the language. So he says, just knock at a door and ask for water. They will let you in. Go talk to women. The Bhojpuri language, she doesn't know. She's a Gujarati woman. And but she goes and knocks on a hut. And she says, I want water. And a hand comes out with the water, and she says, are you not going to call me in? And the woman from inside says, there is always an interpreter, a translator. Gandhi invited all the young lawyers in that district to come and do surveys with all the houses and interpret and talk, translate the language and all that. So there was an interpreter. She says, there is only one piece of cloth in this house. My sister-in-law has worn it to the field. the voice from inside said. And Kasturba was so sad. She came and told Gandhi. That is when Gandhiji started talking about how can you live so helplessly? You have to live with dignity. You have to live with self-respect. So when he is teaching self-respect to women around the world, and he has made more women come into public life than any other politician, and he has treated them as his friends, every other woman who comes into politics. And I don't know where this idea comes that he was, but also, you know, you have to look at the context of the time, the conversation, the kind of language that is used, that the what he advises. But what he advises for women, he advises for men also. It's not that they are any different. He is even advising some people on menstruation, on menopause. He writes letters that he gets. He's addressing every situation. You know, Sarojini Naidu was a poetess given to a very humorous way of talking. So when she saw Gandhi first time in London, she said, "You look like a Mickey Mouse," she told him. And then she was the one who said, "Oh, it's costing so much to keep you in poverty." And that, taken out of the context, is saying that it cost a lot of money to keep him in poverty, which is not true. What do you say, Mr. Mohan?
Yes, I fully agree with you. And he has replied that, okay, he thought for a moment and then said, okay, I think God will forgive me.
Yeah.
She used to make fun of him actually.
She
as you said, a Mickey Mouse.
Yeah,
joke
she joked.
only.
She was constantly joking.
Beauty is she allowed the women to be participate, as you said, in Salt Satyagraha, maximum number, and she allowed Sarojini Naidu to come with jewels also. So it is not a matter.
In London trip, Sarojini Naidu refused to wear khadi or anything. She said, "I would like to dress in my silks and my jewelry and all that." And he enjoyed it. He said, "You should do it if that is what you want to do." That's what she did. You know, so it's a layered life. It's very complex and layered life. Nothing is black and white. We cannot say this or that. You know, we cannot be judgmental on this and that and put a life to guillotine. You know.
Actually, I would like to add one thing.
Yes.
There is a biography by 3 authors. One by H.S.L. Pollack, H.N. Brailsford, and another is Pethick Lawrence. A beautiful biography of Gandhi, out of which the second person, H.N. Brailsford, has observed a thing that has happened in a village in Europe, where a woman, she comes and then she completely stays, she lied down before a toddy shop, like that, along with her friends, throughout the day. That the toddy shop owner cannot sell even a single milliliter of toddy. So the Kallukadai Mariyal, they used to say. The women participation, after that, that person concludes, now Gandhi is able to reach to the remote village and to women also. So I think the British people has to pack up and all those packages and then start going back as early as possible. This happened in 1930. So unfortunately, due to Second World War and other things, it has been. So he had a great influence on women. And as you rightly said, number of women, they came out from various remote villages has never happened anywhere in world also. But for her person, he would not have definitely got.
My mother had told me stories about how young girls would spin at home and take the yarn to the Khadi Bandar and get something in return. This is the kind of empowerment he wanted to give to young women and children. Children also spun. And they would go and give the yarn and take some pepper back, you know, home. This kind of economy was what we were looking at. Your skill and your interest and that bringing in that spinning wheel into political discourse was to keep the crowd non-violent and productive. That is what
Yes, yes.
he was interested in.
My question had something to do with Gandhi's decision on World War II, and at that time, there is to supplement it. I was thinking with the point that where he famously says, "The end does not justify the means." Yeah, and I was thinking whether that contradicts with his decision to.
Absolutely, it contradicts. Gandhi is full of contradictions because he himself tells us that he is constantly looking at situations and working on it. So he tells us that he was hoping that there would be a peaceful transition of power because they were still the citizens of the British Empire, that we must support the British in the war effort. Whereas Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose went to my enemy's enemy is my friend. So he went to Hitler. He went to Japan. He went to seek help from our enemy's enemy. Okay, so this was the conflict between Bose and Gandhi, that you can't, when you are still the subject, or when you are still the citizen of a ruler, you have to look at how you can get that low ruler to leave you peacefully by supporting. This is what he did. He tried raising an army, and then of course he was very disappointed. He said, during this time, that the discussions that took place were, there were many contradictions in those decisions. But he was saying, if we are part of that support system, they will appreciate us. This he had done even in Zulu War, in South Africa. He was with the British, but of course he was the stretcher carrier. But even then, he was helping the Zulus also. As a stretcher carrier, he treated the wounded Zulus also, though he was helping the British. And he was helping those who were going rebelling against the British also. So this, of course, there were many decisions that he took. That particularly about his son, of not sending him to study to London. Those decisions that he took. Is there any parent who can confidently say, "I have been 100% perfect parent"? He thought he was doing a good thing by not indulging in nepotism. When a scholarship came, he said, "I don't want to give it to my son. I'll give it to somebody else." And the son rebelled. And the son wanted to study. But Gandhi said, "I'm giving you the perfect education at home."
So going by Mahesh's question, at any point later, did he feel that probably that was not the right thing as a father for his son?
Mohan, I think, will be able to answer this better.
You have to read the book written by Harilal's granddaughter, Neelam Parikh, where she has produced some unpublished letters of Gandhi written to Harilal, and Harilal written to his daughters. And as she has said, Devika madam has said, a very beautiful letter written by a mother to a son. So these letters reflect the personalities and decisions taken by father, mother, and son. It's a very beautiful triangle. The personality is there. And if you read the book, you will understand that Gandhi had so much love only, nothing but love, pure love. I am ready to forget what all you have done. And you should remember that, as you have previously said, suppose somebody gets a chance to go to London because a Bharatla is needed in Phoenix settlement, we should not, from our family, opt for it. Let some other person from Phoenix settlement, any young youth, just like Chaganlal Gandhi, a relative of Gandhi, let him go. Like that, this is a very extraordinary personality, I feel. So that he never cared about, he was not selfish that only his son should come. And if you read that book, you will understand that Harilal was so close to Gandhi that he associated with Gandhi and then went to jail for 6 times. And suddenly, it's all I have concluded on that day, that speech like that only. It's all fate. It's all destiny. We don't know why he has done like that. He was so much right hand. Actually, Gandhi was so happy that you are my soul, you are my everything. But that man, that Harilal, suddenly he said, no, you have not allowed me to go to London to get my Bharatla. So I am so much depressed. I don't want to be with you. Suddenly he changed it.
And also, when we talk about Harilal as a father, he had failed. We don't talk about the other 3 sons. You know,
yes.
He had 3 other sons. Devdas remained totally loyal and totally, he was with him till his last breath. So we don't talk about the love and affection that the other 3 sons received from Gandhi and gave to him. It's only Harilal that we discuss. Yeah.
And he tried his level best to get passed through the matriculation examination. He failed 3 times, thrice. But he wanted to join with Gandhi again in 1906. But Gokhale said, don't worry, you proceed with your studies. I will send a telegram to your father. These are all very fate only. Suppose he had joined along with his father, he would have been a different person. Neelam Pari concludes in the book that it's only destiny that has separated this father and son. It's a very, very pathetic one. Really.
So the reason why I'm coming back to this question is this particular scenario is very common in today's world, where we have lovely children who actually appreciate and respect their parents, and we have absolutely loving parents who obviously want the best for their children. From the parents' point of view, they will only do what they believe is the best, but there are going to be differences. And the real question is, at the end of the day, leave alone what is right or wrong. How do we negotiate and come to take up responsibility for each other's pain and tribulations? So that's why my question comes, at any point, is there an anecdote which shows how Gandhi says, yes, probably somewhere we could have worked out this other way?
Absolutely. If you had seen that movie, Gandhi, My Father, there is a scene where Gandhi goes looking for him in the train and goes and sits with him, and he regrets very much the things that happened, and he says, let's forget and come together, and Gandhi looks after Harilal's children. His grandchildren were taken care of by Kasturba completely, so it's a loving family, but with conflicts, and conflicts completely maximized because of the personality of the father. This kind of conflicts are there in families around the world, but because of Gandhi, it was Gandhi and it was Harilal, we see it in a magnified glass and make our judgment.
Yes, that's all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Today, people are talking about Patel and Nehru in a very, very aggressive manner. Okay, and they feel that Gandhi made a mistake by making Nehru the prime minister. The facts were that Nehru was negotiating with the British because of the way he was talking, and so Nehru became the leader of the delegation that was discussing ideas with the British. And at this time, there was, a lot of people had to choose. There were 3 people actually in contention. One was Nehru, the other was Patel, and the other was Jayaprakash Narak. The 3 of them were considered. Okay, and did you mute me?
No. Can you just repeat that last line? The 3 of them were? Sorry.
Yeah, the 3 of them were Nehru, Patel, and Jayaprakash Narak. These 3 were considered for leading the independent India. Of this, Gandhi felt Nehru would appeal to people of all places in India. That was Gandhi's idea. Okay. to fault him for today, they because his great grandson or is in politics, or daughter-in-law, great granddaughter-in-law is in politics, to fault him for that is something that I don't understand at all. This is the letter that Nehru writes to Patel and Patel writes to Nehru. I have kept it in my phone because I'm constantly asked for this. Okay. This is after the death of Mahatma Gandhi. That day at 4:30, Patel meets Gandhi, and he was the last person to talk to Gandhi. And he had told him that he is having difficulty in working with Nehru, and there are some differences of opinion. So he'd like out from the cabinet. But Gandhi told him, no, you are both like the eyes of India, and I want both of you here. Jawahar will come after some time. I will talk to him, and in the coming days, please let's meet more often and discuss this. This is what Gandhi told him when he left for the prayer ground where he was shot dead. On 3rd February 1948, 4 days later, Nehru writes to Vallabhbhai, New Delhi, February 3rd, 1948. My dear Vallabhbhai, when Bapu was alive, we had hoped to meet him together and discuss various matters that had troubled us somewhat. You will remember our correspondence. In my last letter, I had expressed the hope that in spite of certain differences of opinion and temperament, we should continue to pull together as we had done for so long. I was glad to find Bapu's final opinion also. Now with Bapu's death, everything is changed and we have to face a different and more difficult world. The old controversies have ceased to have much significance, and it seems to me that the urgent need of the bout is for all of us to function as closely, cooperatively as possible. Indeed, there is no other way. I have been greatly distressed by the persistence of whispers and rumors about you and me, magnifying not out of all proportion any differences we may have. This has spread to foreign ambassadors and foreign correspondents. Mischief makers take advantage of this and add to it. Even the services are affected, and this is bad. We must put an end to this mischief. It is over a quarter of a century since we have been closely associated with one another, and we have faced many storms and perils together. I can say with full honesty that during this period, my affection and regard for you have grown, and I do not think anything can happen to lessen this. Even our differences have brought out the far greater points of agreement between the respect and us we bear to each other. We have even learned to agree to differ and yet carry on together. Anyway, in the crisis that we have to face now after Bapu's death, I think it is my duty, and if I may venture to say yours also, for us to face it together as friends and colleagues, not merely superficially, but in full loyalty to one another. Soon, I hope, one another and with confidence in each other. I can assure you that you will have that from me. If I have any doubt or difficulty, I shall put it frankly to you, and I hope you will do the same to me. I had hoped to have a long talk with you, but we are so terribly pressed for time that we can hardly see each other in private for a long time. For some time or the other, soon I hope we shall have this talk and remove any misunderstanding or misapprehensions that may have arisen. Such talks are necessary from time to time. But meanwhile, I do not want to wait for this talk, and hence this letter, which carries with it my affection and friendship for you. Yours affectionately, Jawahar. For this, Patel replies on the 5th of February 1948, My dear Jawahar, I am deeply touched, indeed overwhelmed by the affection and warmth of your letter of 3rd February. I fully and heartily reciprocate the sentiments you have so feelingly expressed. We both have been lifelong comrades in a common cause, the paramount interests of our country and our mutual love and regard, transcending such differences of outlook and temperaments as existed have held us together. Both of us have stuck passionately to our respective points of view or methods of work. Still, we have all sustained a unity of heart which has stood many a stress and strain and which has enabled us to function jointly both in the Congress and in the government. Recent events have made me very unhappy, and I had written to Bapu when I was going to Bombay appealing to him to relieve me, but his death changes everything, and the crisis that has overtaken us must overtake us a fresh realization of how much we have achieved together and the need for further joint efforts in our grief-stricken country's interests. I had the good fortune to have the last talk with him for over an hour just before his death, and he communicated to me what had passed between you and him, as well as his talk with Mountbatten. He had also fixed an appointment to meet both of us the next day. His opinion also binds us both, and I can assure you that I am fully resolved to approach my responsibilities and obligations in this spirit. I agree with you, and that we must find more time for mutual consultations so that we can keep each other informed of and in touch with what is happening, and we can thus resolve any points of difference that we might arise. We should also find an early opportunity to have a long talk and clear our minds of any doubts and difficulties that may be there. Continued harping on our differences in public or private is bad for us and for the services and bad for the country. The sooner we meet this, we put this at rest once and for all and clear the murky atmosphere, the better. Now, Patel lived till 1950, 2.5 years after independence. Okay, you can imagine what kind of crisis there was in those 2.5 years in India. There were millions of refugees because of partition. There was the trauma of a young country coming up. There was a trauma of getting the whole constitution written, the government formed, various opinions taken, and to start a government. And the trauma of Gandhi's death, that, of all this in 2.5 years, I hear people say, if Patel had been the prime minister, we would have gone in a different way. He had 2.5 years after independence. And he was a part of Nehru's cabinet. He was a part of Nehru's cabinet. He was the deputy prime minister. Both of them had different roles to play. And as home minister, Patel was given the task of going and getting all the states come into the Indian Union. And he was doing that enormously well. So to say Nehru did not do it, Patel did it, it was his task given to him and he did it. To continuously see differences of opinion, because today we are living in a different world, is really, really very tragic. And to hold Nehru responsible for anything that happened after 64, and to hold Gandhi responsible for anything that happened after 1948 is not seeing the truth in its face.
No, I think it was very enlightening. I was just listening to everything and just absorbing. The only thing I wanted to, why did Sardar Patel not even bring the Kashmiri prime minister into the fold? Was there anything I should take this?
No, 2.5 years he lived, Naina, after independence. August 15th, we got 1947. He died in 1950. So in those 2.5 years, how much do you deal with? How many things do you deal with? Is the question, And, do you have to form Governor General? The new constitution had to be written.
Correct.
We had to get the whole thing going. So,
yes.
These questions, in hindsight, we can become judgmental,
Yeah.
But we have to look at the context. We have to look at the context in which, and we can never be judgmental about intentions. You know, these were sterling personalities. They were gold.
He was a real man of steel, I would say.
They were
bring
gold.
The whole,
yeah. And to be judgmental about them today, I think is our failing as in our truth.
I think the message that we are getting is each one of the names that we have mentioned, they were as best as it could ever be. Yes. And they have done their best. Yes. And really, rather than sitting and wondering why they didn't do this or that, it's time for us to ask, what are we doing? And where are we taking it from there?
Absolutely true.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, today, how can we make it relevant in today's times is very, very important. And how we reach out and take the message to students. I think Devika is doing a fabulous job of going to the students. And I think we also, as individuals, need to imbibe this within ourselves. Like, truly, your life speaks for yourself. So that's what it's all about, I think. Thank you.
The kind of image what Gandhi's created, the kind of imagination what he lends us to take it forward it's quite fantastic. It's because if at all India is poor in many struggle or statements, one can easily say that it is because of the lack of imagination than lack of anything. Because the kind of imagination what Gandhi is throwing, it's not in terms of fiction, but in terms of reality. Contradiction is what we are boxing him, a personality like him. But more than that is he has an image of what he's trying to communicate. There's an image he's trying to create every single time, and he's trying to question it. In that sense, all the personalities whom we have heard so far, they had these images in their hand, and fabulous lecture, I would say, that by Dr. V.R.Devika to create that image, that imagination back for the past 1.5 hours. We were in another world and we were another image altogether. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, JC. You have made my job very easy because, as you very rightly put it, I think creating the ethos, recreating the ethos is very, very difficult. And unless someone genuinely lives it every moment and breathes it every second so passionately, it's impossible to pass on that rasanubhava, and that too virtually, literally virtually. I don't think people today can even manage it in person. So thanks to you, Devika. It's really beautiful sharing this passion of yours, though very briefly. Thank you very much for allowing us to enter that space. Thank you very much. Thanks to each and every one of you who have joined us.